I want to welcome you to a very special journey into the secret testament of Jesus the Christ. I am your hostess, Elizabeth MacDonald Burrows. We ask ourselves, what is the meaning of the word mystery? If you remember, the disciples came to Jesus and they said, "Master, why do you speak to the people in parable?" And he said, "Because it is given to you to understand, but not to them." So he indicated that he taught two levels of teaching, one which was deeper and mystical, another which was taught to the outside masses. And that has prevailed through modern time. And now as we approach a new world, a new dispensation, and the millennium, it is time to open the doorway to the most secret of Jesus' teachings, the mystery of the resurrection of the dead. Last week, we introduced some things about the secret teachings, such things as written by Tertullian and Clement and St. Augustine, insofar as their reference. These, of course, were the early bishops that lived during the first 3 centuries after the crucifixion. And of course, they said that to give the mysteries would be like giving or putting a sword in the hands of a child. And I said that I would probably agree with this, in that we were illiterate. We were at a point where, even for many centuries afterwards, we believed that our world was the center of the universe. Many things have changed as we have approached the modern age, and we're going to go into some of the secret teachings of Jesus. All of them will not be just the Secret Testament, which is translated from the archives of the Roman Vatican, and certainly not to the eyewitness account of the crucifixion, which the manuscript was called the letter. And there I owe you an apology, actually. I have the manuscript in a rather beaten up form. I had been able to locate it through another publishing company, and thought I was presenting you a nice clean copy, only to find out that the book that I was holding last week was not that particular Alexandrian manuscript. So we'll try to correct that for you when a new one comes in. In the meantime, we also will be looking at some of the biblical scriptures, things that you're very familiar with, and trying to look at them in a different way than we did before. I always think that we spend a lot of time posing our differences rather than looking for our commonality. I'm still caught with the scripture in Matthew, of course, where Jesus said that the first and greatest commandment, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and all thy soul and with all thy mind." And he said this is the first and great commandment. So our entire journey, regardless of what path we are walking, must be a pathway to oneness with God. That is why Jesus lived, that is why he taught, was to help bring the brotherhood of mankind over the whole of earth. He said the second commandment was to love your neighbor as yourself. And he said on these 2 commandments hang the law and the prophets. And if we were to discard all of our other writings and stick only with those 2 principles and try to live them, we would be as busy as could be trying to live them, to love everyone we meet, black, white, Chinese, Buddhist, Zoroastrianism, Zoroastrian, I'll get that word out in a moment, Zoroastrian, we would not see differences between us, because we would all know we're each walking our individual path to God. But that isn't the way the world is today. We spend so much time seeing our differences and arguing over them, trying to do our dissertations on our beliefs, when you see truth is a singular belief. When you have reached the truth, then there are no differences. As long as there are differences, it means that one or the other or both or neither have reached the truth of the truth. For truth is truth, and it is unchanging. Anyway, that's what this course is all about, is to help guide you into a deeper understanding of particularly Jesus' most secret teaching, which pertained to the resurrection of the dead. So long has Christendom believed that Gabriel would blow his horn and the graves would open up. Skeletons would come out of the graves and they would stand in line for this long and horrible judgment. We have carte blanche bought St. John's beasts and dragons, creatures that have never lived, creatures that do not exist now, and creatures that will never exist. As you remember probably in the course of the Apocalypse, St. John used many allegories. These beasts were anthropos, composite creatures that represented our own lower nature. And that the great battle of Armageddon would not be fought on 11 acres of Megiddo, but instead would be fought on the battlefield of the soul. As the soul tried to disengage itself from its corporeal attachments to become the bride of the Christ and ascend evermore to live in the happy and unitive state with God throughout time. This does not mean total absorption, although ultimately it does. But oneness with God is that great feeling of unity with everything you meet, with the trees and flowers and plants and people. Because to be one with God is to be one with everything. So the resurrection pertained to a precise transformation from human to divine. And that it was considered as raising the dead, a term that we have heard for so long, for 2,000 years, but not a term that we use in relationship to ourselves. Every man, woman, and child must pass through the resurrection of the dead, because it is a wondrous transformation of human to divine. And I'm going to pick up this board here for a moment so that we can show you what we're referring to by drawing. I did not bring the easel up today because I thought we could probably do this a little easier this way, and to help you to remember. We've done this in other classes and courses that we've offered here, but if you remember that we have a physical self, and that around the physical is kind of like a very subtle body, a feeling body, an emotional body, a lower mental. And we don't like our lower mental. That's the one that gives us mental indigestion, that we have all these thoughts and we wish they'd go away. And that is the lower mind. That, of course, is not the higher mind. And so all of these were contained within a very subtle sheath known, I'm drawing rather backwards, so, and I'm not an artist, so you will have to excuse if it's a little out of proportion here. I decided not to spend this life on artwork, but nevertheless I love art. I love great masterpieces. But anyway, this was known as the lower nature, containing our feelings and our emotions and our lower mind. And it's only called a lower mind because it's that part of the great mind that is contained or in the containment field of these lower bodies. And that this lower body is known as, of course, Satan, our mysterious, as I call him, our mysterious little man that walks through medieval Christianity in red suit of underwear. And it comes from the word natus, or birth. Also, the lower body is also known in St. John's Revelation, is often referred to as the Antichrist. So what we're trying to do is to transcend our lower nature. And so we also have a soul. And the soul extends beyond the boundaries of this lesser self. And it contains within it, of course, an aspect of the higher mind. But more important than that, it contains within it the storehouse of the subconscious mind. And our subconscious mind does not just go from the time we were a small child, but it is developed from the beginning of time. So here is layer after layer after layer after layer of knowledge, of memory patterns, in these subconscious chambers. And so now we're housed here. By the way, St. John called this the bottomless pit. And having traveled through a lot of this remarkable transformational change over a period of 27 years, I can well understand why he calls it the bottomless pit. But it houses in us not only our talents and our good, but also all the things that we've done that we wish we hadn't have done. But let us remember this as we take this remarkable journey. Everyone has had skeletons in the closets. We've all done things that we wish we hadn't have done. The important thing is that we're being reborn, changed, and what went on in the past has served as lessons. So let us try to be merciful upon ourselves. Well, in the very heart of this, of course, in the very heart of our soul, and I kind of always draw this as a kind of a five-pointed star, dwells our divine nature. That part of God that he gave just to you and I. In other words, he gave to every one of us a part of himself. And that part of himself is known as his Son, the light of consciousness, that personal God that we have to learn to relate to in order to passing through the resurrection of the dead. The dead has always been looked upon as him who has been in his grave since the beginning of time. He came into our soul as we began our journey through not just the world of matter, but from the very beginning, as a part of the plan. He has always been there. He was the light of God, the first thing that was born of God back in the beginning of time. In ancient times, he was called Mithra, the light of God. So we've looked upon this as the Christ, the indwelling Christ, or that part which is divine in us. So he has slept in his chamber throughout the centuries. Now we've come to that point where we must resurrect him. We must raise him from the dead. And he must raise up, and I drew this far too high, but he must raise up so that he can then descend again and take possession of the soul with all of its lower bodies. And we say to ourselves, why do we argue or fight? Why the great Armageddon battle? Because we are used to the path of self-will, which often goes in contrary to what we should do, while he goes the way of his Father. In other words, he is one, indirectly at this point, one with his Father. So therefore, he carries within him a seed of the divine plan, and we're a part of that. So we often go contrary, meaning anti-Christ, rather than going with him. Now, through the great Armageddon battle, which is human versus divine, on the battlefield of the soul, all of the regions of the subconscious mind is now kind of opened up to be cleansed. And we cannot escape this because, you see, he takes possession. And it's pretty hard to do, but maybe I can draw a little bit smaller, turn this around for just a moment here and draw a kind of a possessive state, and to help you to see this a little bit more clearly. Very poorly done, but nevertheless, we'll have to settle for that. And of course, I had put here, close this off, and with him there is no closing, because he is one with his Father. And so thus it is, once we have raised him from the dead, and he descends again to take possession of the soul, then he can compel us to purify the mind and the body and the emotions and the feelings. And why should they be purified? Because this Antichrist is the part of us that holds hatred and anger and jealousy. None of those are the way of God. And so we must learn to transmute or change everything that we think, so that we think loving thoughts. In other words, become more and more a reflection of our Creator, that we will express him more on earth. The Christ in us needs a physical instrument to bring the divine plan of God upon the earth. And so we surrender self-will or human will to that which is divine will. And then, and by the way, the resurrection of the dead is not something which takes place over a minute or a second. The resurrection of the dead takes many, many years. And St. John of the Cross wrote about this so very, very well in his Dark Night of the Soul, if you're looking for some kind of a reference to that. There's not a lot of writing pertaining to the resurrection. We have one very ancient writing which took place back in Egypt called the Emerald Tablets of Hermes. And we'll just move this board kind of out of the way now. I don't think we'll need it anymore. Just push it out. There we are. The Emerald Tablet of Hermes, coming from the ancient time of Egypt, which talks about the first distillation, is that by gentle heat and pressure, we must separate the spiritus from the crude earth, meaning our earthly body, or the earthly consciousness that the soul is so seeped in. We must, through meditation, contemplation, and action, we must raise him now from the dead, or separate that spiritus from the crude earth, so it can descend again almost newborn, to take possession of us in the corporeal world. There's so much magic that comes with this, because you are never again alone. You never again fear death. You lose those dreads that you had. You know that you will not die until it is your time to go, and that everything is balanced by the law of cause and effect, so that even our death is that which is a part of a much greater plan, and that the loss of a physical body and the emotion and the feelings still leaves the soul in its freedom. So this is the deeper meaning of the resurrection of the dead. To go about the process of this is a very long and arduous one. Now, Jesus was not the only one to teach a pathway that we could use in order to go through the resurrection. The Egyptians, long years or centuries ago, and we talked about this last week, but I just didn't show you the chart. I said that Moses' tabernacle in the wilderness was symbolically. Now, symbolically means that, no, it wasn't the same measurement as the pyramid. But if we were to take the numbers of the pyramid, 6s and 7s, and the list of numbers that talk about our descent into the world of matter and talk about our ascent to the world of matter, we would find that the numbers in the tabernacle in the wilderness totaled the same numbers, the same number as the experiences in the Pyramid of Egypt. And we have talked about this extensively at other times. But as we look at the pyramid here, we have down in here, which is called the Queen's Chamber, is where the or the one seeking to know the mysteries of life would come to learn what they're supposed to do. They would learn here about what we in Christianity call the resurrection of the dead. and they would see the ideal to be achieved. To me, it came as Jesus the Christ, because he is the ideal that every Christian strives to emulate and to seek. To someone who is practicing the world of Buddhism, it would come, of course, as probably Gautama Buddha, or Zarathustra would come as him. So the ideal which is to be achieved. This was shown in the Queen's Chamber, which is kind of like the mother of wisdom, someone giving birth. If you remember, we are giving birth, raising from the dead, that divine Christ. And so, anyway, from here, the initiate was shot down into the subterranean chamber, which was that which reflected the deep levels of the subconscious mind. Because when we go into the battle, the Armageddon battle, we enter into such darkness. And it was no wonder that St. John of the Cross called it the dark night of the soul. But that darkness is not a darkness in absence of light. It is more a darkness from the light. We have walked in corporeal senses. We have been bound to unknowing. We have been satisfied with day-to-day living. And now we have entered a possessed state, a cocoon state. And in that cocoon state, the light which once dwelt in the soul now contains the soul within it. So the soul is like an infant that is in an embryo or embryonic state. It is in such a dark womb, but at the same time, it has never been closer to the mother, and we have never been closer to God. So he takes over that possessed state. And so that represented, of course, the sinking into the subterranean chamber. And all of these measures, 1 and 2 and 5 and 6, and I suppose we'll have to probably go over the numbers again in order for you to understand what I'm talking about when it comes to numbers. But then it came after the subterranean. It either made its exodus, if for instance the initiate or the student did not meet the standards of the initiation of the Hierophants of Egypt, they then would of course be once again expelled to the outside world. This same period in here represents the first 5 stations of the cross of the Via Dolorosa that man passes through in the crucifixion of the soul and the resurrection of the dead. And then, but if by chance it could go on, it enters then into the Grand Gallery to enter the 7th and final epoch of creation, to become divine. And this is a small anteroom where it throws away the very last threads of the ego and then enters into the king's room for the crowning or the unitive state with the indwelling Christ. That's the Egyptians. And then Moses' tabernacle in the wilderness. And one reason I haven't gone through the numbers is because we have gone through them several programs, and I'm afraid those of you who are watching who have seen the other programs may consider it to be rather repetitious. So I'm trying not to do that. We have out here, and we mentioned this last week, out here the outside court, which represents the body. And there are 2 facets of purification. There is, of course, the priest washing his hands, which was the container for water. It was believed, of course, they washed their hands because they had committed the sacrifice of the animal. And true, they had, but there was much more to the ritualistic practice of sacrifice, because sacrifice meant the burning away of the corporeal world so the soul newborn would rise pure to God. And so the fire here in the cremation pit or the sacrificial pit represents that fire of purification. And when we look at the fire of purification, we're talking about the purification that the indwelling Christ will take you through as you pass through the resurrection. And then, of course, the washing of the hands also symbolize the purification of our human world. That one of the first steps we would have to do in this transformational change would be to purify our human life, to live a better way ourselves, to help others to live better, and to clean up this world which we live on. So this represented the purification of our corporeal world, as the fire represents the purification of the Christ light, purifying the soul. And that inside here, of course, was represented the room of the holies, which symbolized the soul. And here were two things to tell us what we had to do. One is the seven-pronged candlestick, which represented the 7 epochs of creation. And I use 7 epochs of creation because I have studied deeply the original Hebrew of Genesis. And Moses made not one single mistake. And that while we take literally those early books of Old Testament, in reality, he is speaking of the plan, not something which has materialized, but God's plan from the very beginning to its point of materialization, and how we were all part of that plan. The original Hebrew is very complex. It's very hard for people to understand because we are so used to thinking in terms, for instance, of Adam and Eve, to give you an example. 1.5 billion Christians believe Adam and Eve were people, where in actuality, Adam represented the descent of the Spirit to live in the Adamic, the ground. And that once having descended into the Adamic, lost into the consciousness of eve or night, darkness and unknowingness which led it astray. And that Cain and Abel represented the two aspects, not two human boys, but two aspects, one good and one evil, that came forth at the time of the soul's enmeshment into the corporeal world of darkness, or eve or night. So you see, there's a lot of difference between original Hebrew and that of how we have interpreted, translated, modified since those ancient days. So Moses was very careful to show the 7 epochs, 7 phases earth would pass through in order to bring forth the divine light. And he also clearly defined it when he showed the 12 loaves of shewbread in 2 stacks of 6, each representing the soul's enmeshment into the 6th epoch, that of human. And the Spirit, or the Christ in us, also incarnate into the 6th epoch, meaning human. These two would have to be united. 12 loaves, 2 must become 1 in order to enter into the Holy of the Holies, which was the inner sanctum containing the Ark of the Covenant. Thus it is that when we can pierce these mysteries in us, and we can journey from the body through the senses, through the mind, we will knock upon the door of the Holy of the Holies. And there we will find in us that divine light which contains the law. So this was all established, and the measurements of this tabernacle all came to 6s and 7s and so on, represent and symbolize that progressive state of the soul in its descent into matter and its ascent. So the mysteries as they came into Christianity, of course, just simply carried on what had always been the most secret and august of the mysteries themselves. I have picked some scriptures for you today to talk about this duality and show you that Jesus taught this remarkable resurrection, more subtle perhaps, but this is in the Gospel of Thomas, and there are several scriptures in here that are pretty important to us. Jesus said, if those who lead you say to you, see, the kingdom is in heaven, then the birds of heaven will precede you. If they say to you, it is in the sea, then the fish will precede you. He said, but the kingdom is within you, and it is without you. And if you will know yourselves, you will be known, and you will know that you are the sons of a living Father. So all this time that we so often have sought heaven someplace up there in the 150 billion galaxies, we find that it is both within and outside of us. And that if we are to live in heaven upon earth, then we are going to have to purify through the transformation or resurrection. We are going to have to purify this lesser nature so that we can live in heaven on earth. In no way has it ever said that we go up to heaven. Even in Revelation it talks about the New Jerusalem descending from heaven. One thing that, and I believe I mentioned this last week, but one thing that is quite fascinating is that Jesus, of course, lived 2,000 years ago. And Neil Armstrong, we consider him pretty much of modern time, one of our early journey people into outer space. Neil Armstrong said, if you cannot understand the nature of the universe, you cannot understand your destiny. And it was 2,000 years before that Jesus said, his disciples came up to Jesus and said, tell us how our end will be. And Jesus said, have you then discovered the beginning? So that you inquire about the end? How many of you know how earth began? How it really began? And how God gave birth out of himself to his Son in the beginning of time. And that his Son lives not only in our world, but in every planet and every sun that is in the universe of the stars. And that earth is one small planet, born of the love of God, like all planets, through a long process. We're going to be covering that, by the way, as we look at Jesus' teachings on the earthly mother and the power of the heavenly Father. He said, for the beginning, where the beginning is, there shall be the end. Remember those words well. For where the beginning is, there shall be the end, so that when I show you the end, you will not be so terribly shocked. For as it was in the beginning, so shall it be in the end. Blessed is he who stands in the beginning, and he shall know the end, and shall not taste of death. And the reason he said shall not taste of death, you can go to oneness with the Father, stand with him as it was in the beginning, then the loss of the corporeal body is not very important. You put a suit of clothes on, you wear it, you take it off. Well, inside you have the feeling of immortality, eternity, forever. It's a wonderful place to be. So, as Jesus talked about this, the resurrection or the transformation, Jesus saw children who were being suckled, and he said to his disciples, these children who are being suckled are like those who enter the kingdom. And they said to him, shall we then, being children, enter the kingdom? And Jesus said to them, when you make the two one, when you make the inner and the outer, and the outer and the inner and the above as the below. So when we make the inner as the outer as the inner, the above as the below, and when we make the male and the female into a single one, so that the male will not be male, the female not female, And he went on to say, when you make the eyes in place of an eye, and the hand in place of a hand, and so on, he said, then you shall enter the kingdom. You see, the soul is neither male nor female. God is neither male nor female. We have referred to him perhaps as he, and some people take offense to that. But it has been commonly taught since the beginning of the schools that God is that which plants the seed. Earth is that which makes the seed to grow. Thus woman became the reflection of earth, and God and man the reflection of God in the sense of male and female. The soul is neither one, and therefore it is into this body governed by God, who put us into this body to learn the lessons that this body has to give us. If we are female, it is because we must learn the ways of compassion. And if it is male, it is to learn the ways of strength. And so when we make them neither male nor female, then we shall enter the kingdom of heaven. So first we must make the inner as the outer as the inner. And when you tell someone that they have to change, that they have to purify, we have a tendency to run away. We don't want discipline imposed upon us. We want to follow self-will. And that's natural. I'm not saying self-will is wrong. It's assured our continuity of survival for over 10 million years. But the time has come when it must go. And so as I go to this last scripture that I have selected here, it also talks about the kingdom of heaven. His disciples said to him, when will the kingdom come? And Jesus said, it will not come by expectation. They will not say, see here, see there, but the kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and men do not see it. So all this time we are seeking for the kingdom of heaven. We live in it. It is our perception of our life that makes it either heaven or hell. I never will forget when I was doing a story one time, I call it Tom's story. He had written me a question asking why he wasn't progressing faster spiritually. And so the story was written for him to help him to understand and see the obstacles that stood in front of him, that kept him from reaching the height spiritually that he wanted to reach. And as these were shown, we caught him up there on the ladder, having just made his transition. And we, of course, wrote, here's St. Peter, as always, sitting there up on the ladder, welcoming Tom. But Tom, he's ready to go on, and St. Peter says, I'm sorry, but you can't go on. And Tom says, why can't I go on? And St. Peter says, well, you look at that house that you just couldn't leave in order to walk, to do some of the work that was prescribed of you. Well, look at it now. It has been sold to a stranger. He said, remember that girl that you were afraid to leave because she might marry someone else? Well, look down there. You see, she has married someone else. All these things that he showed Tom were temporal things of earth that never go with anyone when they go to heaven. And so he told Tom, he said, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to send you back to hell. Meaning he would have to send him back into embodiment in order for him to continue the process of spiritual growth and evolution. So if we look at earth as hell, it is because, again, our perception. I always say that when I was young, I looked at earth as kind of a hell. And as I got older, I looked at it as a great classroom. And now to me, it is almost like heaven. And I do see that heaven is spread all around us, and that it is because we have not purified sufficiently that we do not see it that way. You see, when we're all purified, when we've all passed through the resurrection of the dead, there will be no more wars, because no one would kill another person. That is, would be I'm not even going to say a violation of natural and cosmic law or a violation of God. It is because when we reach that state, we won't want to kill. We would have so much love for everyone, every place. Now we must work at love. We must work at purifying, work at unity. And that's why this course is being brought to you, is because through these weeks as we proceed, we want to help you to enter into the resurrection, into that wonderful transformation. And it will not work if you do not put the things into practice that we talk about. Because we could read 1,000 books, 10,000 books, and we could be no closer to God than we were when we picked up the first one. Someone once asked me, why is it so hard to get to God? And I said, because it is so easy. You see, God is our breath and our life, and He is in us, with us, everywhere, every place. And we have to understand this. And it's because He is everywhere and every place and in us and around us. It means that there isn't any place that He isn't. And so therefore He's so easy to find, because we're so much part of this world. The first teaching that we're going to take up, of course, would be the purification of our corporeal world, or the physical. We talked about this last week as we talked about the Essenes and the years that it has been deemed that Jesus lived among them from the age of about 13 to about the age of 19, working as a carpenter, as his father had done, and studying. That the Essenes first always ask for people to remain on the outside for a period of 3 years of purification. It wasn't just the purification of what they ate or the purification of their body, but it was also to make certain that by the time they were allowed into the next level, which went on for 7 years, before they were allowed into that, they would not have anger or hatred. You cannot expect to have an organization based on love, community as the Essenes had, without the ability to control our anger and hatred and jealousy and a multitude of things that always bring dissension. So a person who was applying to come to the Essenes would be carefully studied to see what would be the nature of the temperament before they were ever allowed into that 7-year period, which would give them the communion with the angels. If you realize 3 always symbolizes purification. The 7 represents the 7 epochs, process of reaching divinity. So we're going to do this in the same manner. We're going to start with that world of health and nutrition, and then we're going to go on to the methods and techniques by which we can purify our thinking and also to purify our minds. Welcome back. I believe I have the drawing ready to continue on, and we stopped there for a few moments, if you noticed a cut, in order that I could do the drawing and not and save you a little bit of time. We're going to the secret gospel. As I said, the first section pertains to Jesus' teachings on health and nutrition. Now, we may wonder why he taught health and nutrition, but you must realize that medicine was not what it was today, and that there was no way of purifying people except through water and air and sunshine. And Jesus had developed in his journeys, of course, and in unity state with God, tremendous powers of healing. But we do learn that all of his healing was not done by the touch, but by the fact that he took people out to the rivers and streams and taught them about purification and cleansing. And I've drawn a chart because I want to help you to understand why Jesus taught the way he did. For some people, there was no other alternative except fasting. I do not want you to think that you have to go on this very extensive fast simply because Jesus taught it. Try to keep in mind that when he is teaching this, he's teaching very sick people. There's no other hope. There are not hospitals in the same form that we have them today, or medicines, and so he taught them by natural and cosmic law. So we will begin with chapter 1. And then many sick and maimed came to Jesus, asking him, "If you know all things, tell us why we suffer with these grievous plagues. Why are we not whole like other men? Master, help us, that we too may be made strong and need abide no longer in our misery. We know that you have it in your power to heal all manners of disease. Free us from Satan." And again, I stress, Jesus did not use Satan as a deified form. He used Satan as a term, meaning that part of us which brings to us death, destruction, old age, and sickness. The part of us that seems to go contrary to the way of the Christ. And so here's a civilization of people who cannot even read and write, who it's impossible for them to understand the sun as a power of God, and that there might be millions of suns in this vast universe of the stars. That they could not understand water as a power coming from God, but rather angels. So when Jesus speaks of communing with the angels, he's talking about the utilization of these powerful and natural forces of water, air, sunshine, earth, what we eat. And also he is telling the people that it is the temptations of their body, our taste buds. You think of what we eat now, all the sweets, the bad foods, the hamburgers, and we wonder why our mentality is not more progressed than what it is. You're going to learn that as we look at diagrams and drawings, you're going to learn that whatever we put in our body is what we become. And because our cells are not just the cells of this, but our brain is comprised of cells. Our heart is comprised of cells. Every organ in our body is made up of cells. And so whatever we're going to put in the body is what all of these must function through and become. And so when they say free us from Satan, free us from this entrapment, they may have believed in the deified Satan. But Jesus did not use Satan in that way. These people could understand Satan, something getting them. They could not understand the power and abuse of natural and cosmic law. These were terms that were far beyond the mentality of the period of time that Jesus taught upon earth. So, free us from Satan and all his great affliction. Master, have compassion on us. And Jesus answered, "Happy are you that you hunger for truth, for I will satisfy you with the bread of wisdom. Happy are you that you knock, for I will open the door of life. Happy are you that you would cast off the power of Satan, for I will lead you into the kingdom of our mother's angels, where the power of Satan cannot enter." And they ask him in amazement, "Who is our mother? And where are her angels? And where is her kingdom?" And Jesus answered truly, he said, "I tell you truly that your mother is in you and you in her. She bore you, she gave you life. It was she who gave to you your body, and to her shall you one day give it back again." And what he's speaking of here is the earthly mother, that our bones, our everything that we are, as far as a physical self, has been created from those things of earth. Even the minerals support our bone, and they come from the rocks of the earth. Gravity fields, everything speaks to us of the nature of earth. and how she grows the fruit trees, the vegetables, how she honors the sun by bringing forth and producing. So he speaks that she is in us. She's in our body, and we are in her, as our soul is in God, and he is in us. Happy are you when you come to know her and your kingdom. If you receive your mother's angels, and if you do her laws, I tell you truly, he who does these things will never see disease. For the power of the mother is above all, and it destroys Satan and his kingdom, and has rule over your body and all living things. And here I stop to comment for a little while also. Even if you lived purely the way Jesus taught, disease would still bear forth in today's world, primarily because we've taken millions of years to build a complex cerebral spinal system, and we are destroying it in a century because of stress. We have pollution that did not exist in Jesus' time. So it is probable that we would not be able to eliminate from our bodies in modern time the total absence of disease. But we can cure ourselves, heal ourselves more quickly. We can have less disease, and we can certainly add to our longevity by living after the manner which he taught us. So he tells us, happy are you when you come to know her and her kingdom. If you receive your mother's angels, and if you do her laws, I tell you truly, who does these things will never see disease. For the power of our mother is above all. The blood which runs in us is born of the blood of our earthly mother. Her blood falls from the clouds and leaps from the wombs of the earth, babbles in the brooks and the mountains, flows wide in the rivers of the plains, leaps in the lakes, rages mightily in the tempestuous sea. The air which we breathe is born of the breath of our earthly mother. Her breath is azure in the heights of heaven, soughs in the tops of the mountains, whispers in the leaves of the forest, billows over the cornfields, slumbers in the deep valley, and burns hot in the desert. He goes on, the hardness of our bones is born of the bones of our earthly mother, of the rocks and of the stones. They stand naked to the heavens on top of mountains, and are as giants that lie sleeping on the sides of the mountain, as idols set in the desert are hidden in the deepness of earth. I want to invite you to be with us next week as we take this journey into the body, its purification, to extend our life, raise our memory patterns, and live much better and more free of illness. Thank you. I want to thank you for joining us on this wondrous journey into mystic Christianity. This show has been sponsored by Christ Church of the Holy Chalice, which is both a Christian mystery school and a church. We know that you have many questions, and we would appreciate your calls at area code 206-362-4134. That is area code 206-362-4134. Or join us on our website, www.mysteryschool, one word, mysteryschool.org. Again, thank you, and the God in me bows to the God in you, and may heaven walk with you all week.